Hi, I'm Tommy-Humprhies for Kitco and Cambridge House. Joining me is Peter Koven, mining reporter with the Financial Post and the National Post. Good to see you, Peter.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So, I consider you the people's analyst, and obviously you're one of the most prolific mining journalists in the country. Can you tell us a little bit about your interpretation of the disconnect between high commodities prices and low share prices in the resource explorers, developers, and producers?
I think that's the million-dollar question that everyone here wants answered. I mean, the fact that commodity prices are reasonably high, I think, shows that underlying demand for these metals remains pretty excellent in Asia and in China, India, across Asia. But the bottom line is there's no investor confidence right now. What's going on in Europe and America has just completely shattered whatever investor confidence was there. People are bailing out of stocks, and in the mining sector, especially the junior mining sector, if you can't get decent liquidity in these stocks, it doesn't matter how spectacular metals prices are, it doesn't matter how much money they're making or could be making. If the bids aren't there, they're just going to collapse, and that's what we're seeing.
Because they're so thinly traded when...
A lot of them are, yeah. And until that reverses, it's hard to imagine what that catalyst is going to be that gets things turned around. I think we keep waiting for what it might be. People are saying now that, I think it was just today that China announced new stimulus measures, and people are thinking, well, maybe that'll get things going again, but something has to happen. There has to be a catalyst.
Muddle through solution in Europe or something, but I don't know. I don't know when will the exploration sector start to see the financing that we had in the years past. It's obviously trying times for the juniors, yeah, particularly the smaller ones.
Thank God for flow-through, where they wouldn't be able to get anything right now.
Yes, thank you to the government. Don't mess with the flow-through tax exemptions. So, I guess talk to me a little bit about what you think commodities prices are going to stay strong in particularly gold, silver, base metals. What's the analyst consensus, and for the people that you talk to, you see it sustaining here?
I think when you look at the precious metals, the outlook is very strong, just because of a weak US dollar and all the troubles going on around the world. In the other metals, you look at base metals, it really depends which one you're looking at. I think for copper in particular, supply is pretty constrained, and demand has remained strong. So that's why copper's performed so much better than a lot of those other metals. But when you look at nickel and aluminum, for example, the oversupply situation is pretty extreme right now. And
nickel's getting beaten up.
They're getting beaten up really badly, and it's hard. It might take a few years for that to really end, because for now, there's just so much oversupply in the market, and if prices go up enough, the Chinese can really ramp up their production fast, as we've seen, which really keeps a lid on things.
Yeah, I read an article last week that China's stockpiles of copper and steel may not even exist. You ever heard anything like that?
you always hear these rumors.
Can't believe everything you read on the internet.
You never know. I mean, what I would say about China is every day it seems like you hear someone else saying that China boom is over and this is it, and they come up with some other reason why China's due for an economic collapse. And I think it was Don Cox who said, as long as I keep hearing that, I'll be confident. When I stop hearing that, that's when I'm going to worry about China.
Well, I think they're calling a collapse in China, and China's growing at 6 or 7% a year, and we're not.
Yeah, and a point that a bunch of people have made that's a good one, that is that China growing at 6 to 7% a year, in terms of overall commodity demand, it's pretty much the same as it was when they were growing 12%, because the economy now is so much bigger than it was 6 or 7 years ago, right? That the overall, when you look in the overall amount of demand that's there, it's virtually the same.
I think you're a smart guy, and I think that you probably have an education about being an investor, and I think you probably want to be a contrarian yourself. But also, being a journalist, you have a mandate to report the news, and I'm wondering, tell me about the conflict that you feel between having to report the obvious sometimes, but wanting to be a contrarian yourself. Like, do you think investors should bet against the media and the headlines? Because I kind of feel bullish every time I see a negative headline, in not just in your stories, but in others. And
I think it's really the job of the media not just to present what's going on, but to really explain the why behind it. Because a lot of the time when you look at some of the headlines, and there's obviously a lot of bad news headlines now, if you dig below the surface a bit, you can see sort of signals of hope or signals that things will recover. And I always try and provide that whole story to readers so that they understand that. I mean, just yesterday I was writing about uranium, and the price keeps falling, and the headlines now are pretty grim, and they probably will be for a while. But if you look a few years down the road and the amount of nuclear reactors that are being
fundamentals
built,
are very strong.
the fundamentals look better than it'll take some time, but the fundamentals look better. So I try and make sure that readers understand that. And I'm not writing just for mining investors. In fact, I'm not writing for mining investors. I'm writing for really a generalist audience. So I want to make sure that they get that whole story.
I wish that some of your colleagues in the U.S. media were as objective as you are. But anyway, so what part of this mining sector makes you the most excited? What do you like to write about and learn about the most? And where do you get what tickles you about this space that made you want to have a career here?
I think it's one of the things that's been interesting about it that I've really learned is, there's a lot of excitement there. This whole world of junior mining and stock promotion and financing. I didn't a lot of unusual characters. None of them are really the same. Some of them, are a bit. The scruples maybe aren't quite as big as some of the others, but but it's just fascinating to see how, for so many of these companies, they basically just live for their next financing, and how much work it is to keeping investors interested in raising money, and the whole process from discovery to production. I had no idea how. I don't think most investors who aren't familiar with resources realize how difficult it is to get through exploration, pre-fees, feasibility, and
it's incredibly expensive, and you're at the mercy to a market.
Exactly. And then everything can be going great, and then all of a sudden there's some economic crisis that has nothing to do with mining, and the whole party ends just like that.
Yeah, we have obviously, we've got lots of hand waving in this business, and I'm wondering, what do you think could be a more efficient way to explore and develop commodities projects? Should it be privately financed? What do you think could make this sector more efficient?
Well, there's no easy answer. I mean, I think one thing we have learned certainly from 2009 and 2008, 2009, and also today, is that relying on the capital markets strictly can be a real bad idea, because you never know when that market's just going to disappear on you. I think what we're seeing now is a lot of companies learned that lesson from 08, 09. They've turned to the private financing. A lot of them have gotten, offtake arrangements from Asian companies and things like that, and they've learned that just relying on investors to be there when you need the next 50 million is a bad idea.
Very dilutive idea.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can even raise the money, it'll be incredibly dilutive. That's the other factor. And also, we're seeing some high yield debt in the resource space now, which we didn't see in the last cycle. So people are coming up with new and innovative ways to raise the money.
Streamers, and there's lots of new activity.
Like Franco-Nevada and Silver Wheaton, and I
think one of the main sponsors of the show, Waterton Global, is a debt provider to resource companies. But I often wonder, should it all be private, and should it be done without the high financing fees and without the hand waving and the marketing? But I don't see it working without it.
And the thing is, the reason the TSX and the TSX venture work is because of that junior retail investor crowd that will take up those shares. If they weren't there to keep these stories alive, they would just die as soon as the financing was done. They create the liquidity, they keep the interest going in these stories. I don't believe these companies could ever raise money unless they have that support from the.
Considering how important it is to find and develop and finance new projects, it seems like, obviously I think Canadians should be very proud of this sector, and it obviously contributes remarkably to our GDP, but how do you convince more of the world to participate in this exploration and development game? What could Canadians do better about telling the story more broadly? How can we get more people interested in this sector?
Well, I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that. I think investors around the world are gravitating to the resource sector more and more. They see what's happening in China. They see what's happening in the rest of the world. Companies like Barrick and Goldcorp are big global players that everyone's familiar with. They've got investors all over the world. I think if you're talking more about kind of the junior crowd, I think a lot of investors still don't have confidence in a lot of these names. They want to see more liquidity. They want to see more institutional support. There really aren't a lot of institutions that focus on these sort of names. There's a handful, but not a lot. And it's just, until you get to a certain level of market cap and respectability, it's really hard to get that attention. And unfortunately, there's a lot of companies here that would like to get to that level and just aren't really able to do it.
So you obviously get a bit of a pulse of the investment banks and the investment services firms that are involved in this sector. What's the sentiment there like right now? Has it ever been worse in your career?
It's terrible. Has it ever been worse? It was probably worse in 2009, but it's almost as bad. In fact, you could even argue it's worse now. There were some deals getting done in 2009. We saw some gold companies like Cisco actually able to issue quite a bit of equity then. Right now, there's just nothing going on in equity. And we saw this week Canaccord doing a whole bunch of layoffs.
16 branches were closed.
Yeah, and you hear about a lot of the other banks, firing people and cutting back, and it's the ultimate cyclical business, right? And they're feeling the pain right now. But once things turn around, I'm sure they'll be rushing to hire again, and that's always the way it goes.
So I'm sure there's lots of competition for mining reporter jobs right now.
Media is tough right now.
Definitely. Well, how do we follow your columns? Where do you got to go? financialpost.com/mining or?
Yeah, I'm in the paper most days, in the National Post, and if you go on financialpost.com, we have a whole mining section, and you can see almost everything I write there.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here. Thanks, Peter.
Pleasure.
Cheers,
Thanks for having
man.
me.
Thanks very much.